In the final days of the Clone Wars, the galaxy stood poised on the brink of transformation, though few understood just how precarious peace had become. The Jedi Order, Guardians of the Republic, had been spread thin across countless battlefronts. Each Jedi Knight and Master carried the weight of countless lives on their shoulders, leading legions of clone troopers in a struggle against the forces of the Separatists. Darth Sidious, hidden in plain sight as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, patiently enacted his grand plan to eradicate the Jedi, consolidating absolute power under the dark shadow of the Sith. Yet, in this alternative unfolding of fate, the Jedi would not be caught wholly unawares. And so, when Order 66 was transmitted, it did not succeed in the sudden, crushing blow Sidious had envisioned. This failure would lead the galaxy into a civil war without end, pitting a cunning Sith Lord and his loyal forces against an alliance of Jedi Masters who refused to vanish into the Force without a fight. Whispers of unease among the Jedi Council had grown louder in the days preceding that infamous command. Mace Windu, a man of decisive action and unerring conviction, had grown particularly suspicious of the Supreme Chancellor. The war had dragged on far longer than expected, and each time the Jedi saw an opportunity to bring it closer to an end, Palpatine found a reason to extend his emergency powers, a reason to keep the Jedi firmly on the front lines. Yoda, the ancient and revered Grand Master, shared these doubts in his quiet, contemplative manner, making subtle moves to tighten communication between the scattered Jedi. Obi-Wan Kenobi, always the steadfast sentinel, tried to stay true to the Council's decisions and the code that had guided him for so many years. Ki-Adi-Mundi, with his keen intellect, added his voice to the chorus of concern. Increasingly, the Jedi leaders felt certain that something dark coiled at the heart of the Republic. Their primary challenge was proving this suspicion, or at the very least ensuring they would be prepared if their worst fears were realized. That moment of realization arrived as the Council observed the unraveling of Palpatine's calm facade. Mere hours before the Chancellor was set to declare himself Emperor, Mace Windu confronted him in his grand office in the heart of the Senate building. The confrontation began much as it had in the known timeline. Windu arrived with 3 fellow masters, determined to arrest the man they believed to be the Sith Lord behind the war that had consumed the galaxy. Palpatine unleashed a torrent of dark power, cutting down 2 of the masters in swift arcs of red energy. But Mace Windu was not so easily overcome. Their lightsabers clashed with thunderous echoes, while outside, the night sky of Coruscant twinkled with the glittering lights of starships and neon-laced skylanes. Windu's skill in Vapad and the clarity of his convictions seemed to give him the upper hand, just as it had in that other reality. However, Palpatine possessed more than raw force powers and cunning reflexes. He had, for years, orchestrated the creation of a failsafe in the form of the clone army. Spread across the galaxy, hundreds of thousands of clone troopers carried an inhibitor chip that was meant to override their loyalty to the Jedi and turn them into executioners at his single command. Order 66. Countless battalions were poised to destroy the Jedi simultaneously, ensuring that no master, knight, or Padawan could survive. But unbeknownst to Sidious, Jedi healing techniques had uncovered hints of abnormal implants in a handful of clones, and certain specialized medical droids on Kamino had begun to question the function of these chips. Ki-Adi-Mundi, always suspicious, found enough evidence to raise alarms among his fellow masters. While they could not prove the scope or full significance of the chips, the Jedi had begun surreptitious checks and procedures for those clones most trusted by the Order. In a few key battalions, the chips were quietly disabled or removed. Captain Rex of the 501st Legion, for example, had been deeply loyal to Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, forging bonds on countless battlefields. Rex was among the first to have his chip discovered and removed, and though he did not entirely understand the significance, he recognized that these procedures served some greater purpose. This quiet sabotage, hidden from Palpatine's all-seeing eyes, would ultimately prevent the clones from turning on the Jedi wholesale. On many worlds, the clones simply received no word or else received conflicting commands. In others, they hesitated as their chips malfunctioned or as an odd sense of duty to their Jedi generals clashed against newly implanted protocols. And in yet other sectors, entire armies turned upon each other, creating chaos where once had been precise orchestrations of control. Within the Chancellor's office, the deadly duel between Mace Windu and Darth Sidious continued unabated. Lightning crackled from Palpatine's fingertips, scarring the walls and shattering window panes. Though Windu expertly deflected and even reversed many of these attacks back onto Palpatine, scarring his features, the sudden turmoil erupting throughout the Republic stilled his hand. Word reached him through his hidden earpiece that something was amiss with the clones. Scattered transmissions from Jedi Masters around the galaxy described some troopers attacking while others sided with them or simply refused to carry out the order. The carefully laid plan of the Sith was unraveling. Sensing that the tide was turning, Mace Windu made a rare decision to coordinate with reinforcements. He reached out through the Force, silently calling upon Yoda, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, among others, to converge on the Chancellor's location. Though this might risk leaving other fronts unprotected, it was clear that the only way to end this crisis was to strike at its source. In the corridors beyond, Loyalist Senate guards and members of Palpatine's Red Guard were already in pitched skirmishes against clone troopers whose chips had malfunctioned or who were uncertain whom to obey. Smoke drifted through shattered halls, and the hum of blaster fire was interspersed with the buzz of lightsabers igniting. Speeders screeched overhead, some crashing into the building's facade as the chaos spread like wildfire throughout Coruscant. Sidious, desperate to regain control, attempted to send direct signals to the clone commanders, but the compromised chips and the sabotage orchestrated by the Jedi made those signals sporadic and largely ineffective. Though thousands of Jedi still died in confusion across the galaxy, the utter annihilation that Sidious had planned did not come to pass. The weight of this failure twisted his face in rage. At last, Ki-Adi-Mundi arrived. Having survived a near execution on Megiddo through a split-second warning from the Force and help from troopers unsure if they should obey a contradictory order, he sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors of the Senate building. His regal, elongated head crest, once a symbol of calm wisdom, was now streaked with dust and sweat. He joined Mace Windu just as Palpatine summoned a burst of dark energy, knocking Windu from his feet. The two masters locked eyes for the briefest of moments. A silent agreement formed between them. They would not let the Sith Lord escape, no matter the cost. In the distant reaches of space, Obi-Wan Kenobi was inbound. Having been on Utapau to apprehend General Grievous, he had only just delivered the finishing blow to the Separatist cyborg leader when the wave of confusion hit his clone battalion. Obi-Wan's quick wit, and the luck of having Commander Cody's chip fail under the stress of recent modifications, allowed him and his clones to stand against scattered pockets of troopers who did receive the order. Once Obi-Wan confirmed that the threat from Grievous had ended, he commandeered a starship and set course for Coruscant, fueling his jump to hyperspace with an urgency born of the Force's whispered warnings. It was as if the Force itself was screaming for him to join his fellow masters at the epicenter of the cataclysm. Meanwhile, Yoda sensed the dark shift through the Force while he was on Kashyyyk, aiding the Wookiees in fending off a large Separatist assault. He had known there was some hidden scheme afoot. He felt the swirling shadows each time he reached deeper into meditation. But even he, with centuries of wisdom, had not foreseen the scope of Palpatine's duplicity. When the message reached him that Mace Windu was dueling the Sith Lord, Yoda did not hesitate. Without any explanation beyond the urgency of his expression, he left the Wookiee leaders in the capable hands of the clones who had not turned and hopped onto a small transport. The pilot, a Wookiee ally, roared a farewell as Yoda guided them into orbit, setting a course for Coruscant at top speed. Back in the highest office of the Republic, the swirling energies of light and darkness clashed with violent abandon. Mace Windu, battered and his robe singed, pressed forward with Vapad strikes too fast to see. Ki-Adi-Mundi, lightsaber glowing blue against the gloom, flanked Sidious from the side. The Chancellor's eyes glowed gold with malice, and his once handsome visage had contorted into something bestial. Between them flickered the arcs of lightning, the hiss of sabers meeting in midair, and the crash of debris as the building's integrity threatened to fail. A chunk of the ceiling collapsed behind Ki-Adi-Mundi, and the master barely leaped aside in time to avoid being crushed. In his desperation, Sidious brought the full might of the dark side into the office. Columns splintered as waves of telekinetic power radiated outward. The Force screamed, and the Jedi felt the echoes of it in their hearts. For a moment, Sidious seemed unstoppable, as if centuries of Sith cunning now erupted with savage wrath. Pain coursed through Ki-Adi-Mundi's body, and even Mace Windu, attuned as he was to the darkness through Vapad, staggered back in shock. But the Jedi had something Sidious did not anticipate: the unwavering unity of purpose that formed when Defenders of Light realized the hour was darkest. Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi drew upon the Force not merely as individuals, but as representatives of the entire Order's hopes. Their sabers crossed in an X, forging a barrier of superheated plasma that redirected Sidious's wave of power. The shock wave dissipated, leaving the office scorched and trembling, but still intact. In that moment of stalemate, the broad doors hissed open, and Obi-Wan Kenobi dashed in, breathing heavily from his race through the Senate building. With him came a handful of loyal clones, including Commander Cody, though they stayed at the threshold to secure the entrance against any Red Guards that might attempt to reinforce the Sith. Obi-Wan's jaw clenched as he saw his two fellow masters locked in mortal combat with the Chancellor. He immediately jumped into the fray, engaging Sidious with a quick series of Sorisu strikes designed to harass and unbalance the Sith. Though exhausted from the duel with Grievous and the frantic journey, Kenobi's calm presence and measured defense served as a bulwark, letting Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi catch their breath and recenter their tactics. Sidious let out a snarl that rose to an unhinged cackle. "Fools," he spat. "Your Jedi Order is broken. Even now, my loyal clones purge your ranks. You will fall, just as the Republic must give way to the rule of the Sith." But his bravado masked desperation. He could feel that the telepathic hold he had once exerted over the clones via the chips was fading. The Force was saturated with the chaos of countless battles, not the swift, decisive blow he had painstakingly arranged. Outside, the clash between loyal clone forces, confused battalions, and the last dregs of the separatist threat had turned Coruscant's skyline into a tapestry of laser fire and plasma bursts. Palpatine could not sustain his illusions of absolute control for much longer. His only recourse was to slay these masters swiftly and seize enough power that even a fractured galaxy would have no choice but to kneel. From behind Obi-Wan came the diminutive form of Yoda, staff clacking on the ruined floor. The Grand Master's face held more sadness than fury. He saw not only a vicious Sith Lord, but a wounded Republic that had been manipulated at every level. "End this, we must," Yoda whispered, brandishing his small green lightsaber with a graceful, sorrowful flourish. Sidious whipped around, unleashing a volley of Force lightning at the ancient master. Yet Yoda raised his hand, absorbing the energy with a shimmering aura and the slightest grimace of pain. He redirected the blasts upward, scorching the shattered ceiling further. The combined might of 4 powerful Jedi Masters now faced the lone Sith Lord. Even Sidious, with all his cunning, recognized that this was not a fight he could easily win. The office groaned as structural supports strained under the barrage of Force powers. The floor tilted ever so slightly, and sparks rained from overhead fixtures. Step by step, the Jedi pressed Sidious back, cornering him near the panoramic windows that once showcased the grandeur of Coruscant's cityscape. The city beyond was alight with chaos, flickers of battle playing out like some twisted fireworks display. Sidious's eyes flicked from one master to the next, searching for a gap or a chance to manipulate their doubt. But Mace Windu's expression was unrelenting. Yoda's was resolute, Obi-Wan's calm and prepared, and Ki-Adi-Mundi's determined. The opportunity Sidious sought would not be found here. And then a tense hush fell over the ruins of the office. A swirl of dust drifted by, illuminated by the flickering overhead lights. This was the moment of final confrontation. Sidious snaked his hand behind his back, feigning the need to steady himself. With a sudden snap of motion, he flung a hidden dagger of crimson plasma, a short-bladed lightsaber or vibro weapon he'd concealed. It whirled in the air, aimed straight for Obi-Wan's chest. Yet the Force was with Obi-Wan, and his Sorisu form had trained him for exactly such an ambush. He batted the weapon aside, sending it clattering to the floor. Seeing his last trick fail, Sidious let out a harsh cry. He launched into a savage flurry of saber strikes, pivoting from Yoda to Mace and back, trying desperately to break free. The four masters fought like the coordinated limbs of a single entity. Windu's Vapad hammered Sidious from the front, forcing him to defend with all his speed. Obi-Wan's defensive mastery kept Sidious's counters from landing lethal blows. Ki-Adi-Mundi found openings for precise jabs that forced the Sith to pivot or leap aside. Yoda's agility and deep reserves of force energy added unpredictability, letting him vault over Sidious and redirect his relentless fury. Their synergy was more than martial skill. It was the force bonding them, a luminous tapestry that Sidious could not fully unravel. With each crashing impact of sabers, the windows behind Sidious cracked further. Finally, a particularly fierce parry from Mace Windu slammed Sidious's crimson blade aside and sent a ripple of energy barreling into the transparisteel. It burst outward, showering the outside air with fragments that glittered like deadly diamonds in the neon glow of Coruscant. Sidious stumbled to the jagged edge, the wind whipping through the office, stirring the tattered robes of all who stood within. His chest heaved, face contorted by the reflection of the city's many lights, and for an instant, it appeared he might hurl himself away or attempt some final gambit. But Mace Windu, with his extraordinary reflexes and the clarity of that moment, seized the chance. He lunged, placing his amethyst lightsaber directly at Sidious's throat. "In the name of the Jedi Order, you are under arrest," Windu said, voice resonating with a harsh finality. Anger, hatred, and fear swirled in Sidious's eyes, but he did not move. The success of arresting a Sith Lord in such a scenario was unprecedented. Yet the Jedi had cornered him, battered him down. All around the building, clone troopers who had malfunctioning chips, or no chips at all, had secured the perimeter, preventing Sidious's personal guard or any political lackeys from intervening. The city was in chaos, but at least in this chamber, the illusions that Palpatine had carefully woven lay in ruins. A shudder ran through the floor. Far below, some explosion rocked the Senate building, possibly sabotage from Red Guards or a desperate attempt by Sidious's loyalists. Obi-Wan quickly gestured for Yoda and Ki-Adi-Mundi to hold Sidious while he stepped back to coordinate the next steps. He signaled to the clones at the entrance, ordering them to find a secure way to transport the prisoner to the Jedi Temple. The temple itself was not spared the ravages of the clone confusion. Some troopers had attacked the temple, while others fought to defend it, and many Jedi within had to fight for their lives. Yet that ancient structure stood as a place of force resonance. If there was a location that could contain Sidious's power safely, it was there. However, as the masters prepared to escort their captive, Sidious let out a final, chilling laugh. He raised his chin a fraction, meeting Mace Windu's gaze. His lips curled into a sneer. "You think you've won?" His voice carried an eerie calm. "I am the Senate. I am the Republic. My empire was forged the moment this war began. Kill me, arrest me, do what you will, but my will lives on in every corner of this galaxy." A ripple of darkness erupted from him, though it was quickly dampened by Yoda's raised palm. The chill lingered in the air, as though a harbinger of the continuing struggle that would plague the galaxy for years to come. The next hours were a blur of tension. The Jedi, uncertain how best to contain Palpatine, chose to hold him in a specialized cell deep beneath the Jedi Temple, one previously used for dangerous artifacts or criminals too powerful to be kept in conventional prisons. They worked in shifts, Mace Windu and Yoda the primary overseers, using the Force to keep Sidious subdued. But the war outside did not cease. Despite Palpatine's captivity, the confusion among the clone army had escalated into civil conflict. Some Legion commanders, those unaffected by the sabotage, still believed they had a standing order to hunt the Jedi. Others, having had their chips removed or malfunction, continued to fight side by side with the Jedi. Splinter groups of clones fought each other on multiple worlds, occasionally aided or opposed by local militias. And of course, the separatist remnants seized the advantage of this chaos, refusing to lay down arms. Count Dooku had been killed previously in a confrontation with Anakin Skywalker, but many of his lieutenants remained, and their armies still inflicted heavy losses wherever they could. Amid this maelstrom of conflict, the Jedi Council reorganized itself. Those who survived the initial wave of partial betrayal returned to Coruscant as quickly as possible. In the temple's battered chambers, the Masters convened. Yoda presided, Mace Windu at his side, while Ki-Adi-Mundi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a small circle of other survivors stood around a large holotable that flickered with partial images of the galaxy's chaos. The holonet was in disarray, transmissions jammed or confused by the warring factions. Kamino itself was on lockdown under uncertain leadership. Troopers on Mandalore had fragmented, with some upholding the Mandalorian government's neutrality, others attacking, and still others pledging loyalty to the Jedi. Each planet had its own mosaic of allegiances. Anakin Skywalker was notably absent. Rumors swept the temple of his involvement in the near-complete downfall that had been narrowly averted. Some said he had helped kill Count Dooku, that he had suspected Palpatine but arrived too late to confront him. Others whispered that Palpatine had been grooming Skywalker to be his new apprentice. The Council had no concrete information. They knew only that the Chosen One had vanished, last seen heading into the lower levels of Coruscant, perhaps drawn by some cryptic promise. Obi-Wan grappled with confusion and worry for his former Padawan. But the demands of the crisis provided no time to search for him personally. For the moment, the Council's directive was clear: contain the chaos, secure Palpatine, and salvage the Republic if possible. Outside the temple, the Senate itself was in shambles. Many senators had gone into hiding. Some formed emergency committees to protest the Jedi's coup, as pro-Palpatine loyalists were calling it. Others demanded the immediate dissolution of the clone army, citing evidence that the entire war had been orchestrated by Palpatine from the start. As the Jedi had predicted, Palpatine's supporters twisted events to brand the arrest of the Chancellor as an illegal overthrow of a legitimate government. With the holonet spitting half-truths and contradictory stories, entire star systems had to decide which narrative they believed. Wars, after all, are not won by arms alone but by the hearts and minds of populations. Under the strain of these revelations, Mace Windu's leadership took on a new dimension. He had never been one to seek popularity or easy compromise, but necessity demanded that he become a political figure as well as a military leader. He formed a provisional council with Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and a handful of other senators who had always been critical of Palpatine's emergency powers. Their collective goal: to restore lawful governance, rein in the out-of-control clones, and implement a ceasefire with the Separatists, if possible. Bail Organa, ever the diplomat, pleaded for calm negotiations, though the illusions propped up by Palpatine had left an atmosphere of distrust. Many worlds suspected the Jedi of wanting an empire of their own. Windu's unwavering honesty and directness helped, but suspicion lingered like a toxic haze. Yoda, meanwhile, took responsibility for the direct guardianship of Sidious's cell. In quiet hours, he sat just beyond the heavy doors, meditating on the swirling energies within. The darkness radiating from Sidious was intense, reaching out to exploit fear, anger, or any sense of desperation in those near enough to feel it. Yoda kept it contained through will, faith, and the grace of the Force. In that flickering darkness, Yoda sensed glimpses of the future. Shadows of violence, a civil war stretching out with no clear end, Jedi turning from the light in despair, worlds devoured by conflict. Yet Yoda also felt strands of hope. The light had not been snuffed out. Indeed, it burned brightly in the hearts of beings across the galaxy who realized the extent of Palpatine's treachery. If the Jedi could keep that spark alive, there might be a chance to unify the fractured Republic. Weeks turned into months, and the lines of battle redefined themselves. The Separatists saw in Palpatine's downfall a chance for victory, or at least a more favorable settlement. Some of their leaders proposed peace talks, but others pressed the advantage, seizing vulnerable hyperspace lanes. The clones, once a unified force, had become a patchwork of factions. On planets where the chips were quickly discovered and removed, the clones cooperated with local governments. On others, they were still locked in a misguided mission to exterminate Jedi. Freed from the central command, they devolved into warlord-like enclaves, especially in rimward regions, forming alliances of convenience with criminal cartels or local militias. Even the Jedi Temple itself bore scars from repeated skirmishes, as wave after wave of shadowy operatives attempted to either free Sidious or assassinate him to prevent him from revealing their complicity. During one such incursion, a group of mercenaries, rumored to be led by a fallen Jedi, managed to bypass a portion of the temple's defenses in the dead of night. They aimed to breach the subterranean cells. Luckily, Yoda, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and a squad of loyal clones arrived just in time. Lightsabers clashed in the darkness of the temple's underlevels, the stench of scorched metal filling the air. Ki-Adi-Mundi's calm approach contrasted with Yoda's precise acrobatics. Together, they dispatched the intruders. As the last mercenary fell, the Jedi realized that such infiltration attempts were likely only the beginning. The temple had become ground zero in a larger conflict to determine the fate of the galaxy. Indeed, if Sidious escaped, the entire war could tip irreversibly into darkness. All the while, Mace Windu played a double role, half politician, half Jedi warrior. Reluctantly, he traveled to various star systems that teetered on the brink of open rebellion, forging pacts with local leaders, ensuring that the truth about Palpatine's betrayal reached the public. He was forced to rely on his formidable powers of persuasion, something that did not come easily to him. Sometimes Obi-Wan accompanied him, employing the gentler negotiation tactics for which he was famed. Over countless missions, they prevented multiple star systems from allying themselves with extremist elements, gradually building a network of trust. Places like Alderaan, Naboo, and Chandrila became safe havens for refugees of the war, allowing the seeds of a new coalition to sprout. Yet the Sith's shadow was not entirely contained within Sidious's cell. Rumors surfaced of a masked figure leading deadly raids in the Outer Rim, employing red-bladed lightsabers and commanding a legion of defected clones. Some said it was General Grievous resurrected, though Obi-Wan had personally slain him. Others whispered it was Dooku's secret apprentice. But a handful of Jedi who encountered this figure and survived spoke in hushed tones. He fought like Anakin Skywalker, but twisted, darker. Upon hearing these rumors, Obi-Wan's heart clenched with guilt and sorrow, for he had no proof, yet the possibility weighed heavily on him. Ki-Adi-Mundi, equally troubled, organized teams of knights to investigate. Time and again, they arrived too late or were outmatched by this mysterious adversary, leaving the questions more haunting than ever. Meanwhile, Palpatine waited in his cell, imprisoned but never helpless. With each passing day, the Jedi felt the dark side radiating from him like a slow, corrosive poison. He refused to cooperate with any interrogation, using manipulative half-truths to sow doubt among those who questioned him. His legal status remained in limbo. The Senate was fragmented, and no official trial had yet been convened. Rumors abounded that certain wealthy donors or unscrupulous senators were paying for saboteurs to bust him out. The Jedi, for their part, dared not attempt a summary execution or extrajudicial punishment. Such an act would betray the very principles they sought to uphold. So they waited, hoping to restore enough rule of law for a legitimate trial, while the galaxy burned on in endless civil war. Amid the carnage, pockets of hope emerged. Jedi who survived the initial betrayal helped local populations rebuild in war-torn systems. Where clone troopers found their chips disabled, they reunited with their Jedi generals in a sense of renewed purpose. Freed from the oppressive oversight of Palpatine and the constraining illusions of the Council's old ways, Jedi and clones worked together in more organic, cooperative fashions. The seeds of a new bond were being planted, one forged not merely in the roles of leader and soldier, but in the shared trauma and the mutual recognition of each other's humanity. This undercurrent of unity gave Mace Windu and Yoda the faintest hope that perhaps the Force was guiding them to a new, more balanced era, though at a terrible cost. On the political stage, Bail Organa struggled daily with how to bring the fractious Senate under any semblance of unity. Often in secret, he conversed with Yoda or Mace, seeking advice. But though the Jedi were wise in the Force, they lacked the political infrastructure and broad experience needed for large-scale governance. The conversation often circled back to the same dilemma. If the Senate as it was could not be reconstituted, would a new body have to be formed? And how could it be done without inciting further conflict? Meanwhile, many star systems had begun to form their own coalitions, ignoring Coruscant altogether, operating as independent fiefdoms. Some sought official alliances with the Jedi, others declared them outlaws. The notion of a new republic was hotly debated on every network still functioning, but no consensus emerged. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, criminals and warlords thrived. With the official government in shambles, the holonet rife with propaganda, and major trade routes disrupted by battles, black markets and smuggling rings flourished. Spice cartels gained unprecedented power, and slavers took advantage of the chaos. Jedi teams found themselves diverted from strategic objectives to put out these moral fires, stepping in to free captured populations or negotiate ceasefires with local crime bosses. Each such mission chipped away at the Jedi's resources and tested their moral fortitude. They were keepers of the peace, but the galaxy offered them war without end. One fateful day, intelligence arrived at the temple suggesting that a major contingent of clones, still loyal to Sidious's directive, had formed a stronghold on Mustafar, the fiery world once used by the Separatists for covert operations. This stronghold was rumored to be manufacturing advanced war droids and had even repurposed old Separatist technology for renewed assaults. Obi-Wan Kenobi volunteered to lead a strike force to neutralize the threat. Though Mace Windu initially resisted, the temple needed every master it could spare. He agreed that Obi-Wan's experience with infiltration and negotiation might stand the best chance of dismantling the Mustafar operation from within. Ki-Adi-Mundi was to join him, while Yoda and Windu maintained watch over Sidious. As Obi-Wan's team departed, they could not help but remember how everything had started with the Clone Wars on Geonosis, with the first battles, the illusions woven by a phantom menace named Sidious. Now they faced clone soldiers who were disillusioned or deeply entrenched in the leftover programming of a war meant to exterminate Jedi. The cycle of conflict felt endless. Yet Obi-Wan maintained a composed determination. He believed that if this threat on Mustafar could be quelled, perhaps the Jedi would gain a strategic foothold to broker a large-scale ceasefire. As the strike force slipped into hyperspace, Obi-Wan closed his eyes and allowed the currents of the Force to guide his senses. Somewhere in those swirling eddies, he felt a flicker of something familiar. Anakin's presence, or what was once Anakin's presence. The Force rippled with sorrow, betrayal, and anguish. Could it be that the rumors of a masked figure were indeed true? On Mustafar, the black spires rose from lakes of molten lava. Conveyor belts carried crates of newly forged weapons. Batches of battered Separatist droids were refurbished, rearmed, and tested against captive creatures or, in some horrific cases, captive sentients. The clones stationed there wore no recognizable Legion markings. They had painted their armor in a foreboding shade of obsidian, leaving only faint crimson symbols that hinted at an allegiance to the Sith. As Obi-Wan's infiltration craft landed in the shadows of a basalt formation, Ki-Adi-Mundi joined him at the ramp, scanning the area with binoculars. Vapor hissed, carrying toxic fumes. A small squad of Jedi Knights and loyal clones disembarked, hushed and alert. Their plan was to slice into the stronghold's central computer, disrupt communications, and sabotage the droid production lines. Then, ideally, they would broadcast a message to these misguided clones, revealing Sidious's capture and urging them to stand down. They hoped enough of them would listen. If not, the Jedi were prepared for a hard fight. Slowly, they crept into the facility through service tunnels, mindful of the scorching heat that pressed in on every side. The darkness within was illuminated only by the intermittent glow of molten rivers flowing below graded walkways. The hiss of machinery and the clang of assembly lines provided a constant backdrop, a mechanical heartbeat in the heart of Mustafar. As they advanced, Ki-Adi-Mundi sensed something. Like an echo in the Force, a tremor of familiarity. Glancing at Obi-Wan, he confirmed the same worried expression. The presence was faint but definitely belonged to a Force user, steeped in darkness. The infiltration team paused at a junction, exchanging looks of concern. Whoever was here, they were not merely a fallen Jedi or a random assassin. The aura was intense, suffused with hatred and regret. Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi signaled for the rest to be on guard. They pressed deeper into the stronghold, the clang of their boots masked by the roars of distant machinery. Further within, they discovered rows of cells containing captured Jedi or political dissidents. Some were battered from torture, barely clinging to life. The infiltration team freed as many as they could, providing them with water and guiding them toward the exit. It was a horrifying reminder that the conflict had devolved into atrocities on all sides. Among the rescued captives was a Jedi Knight named Vera Aldis, who had been taken prisoner months ago during a skirmish on Sullust. Her eyes were dull with trauma, yet she found a spark of hope in Obi-Wan's presence. Gasping for breath, she muttered that a Darth Vader was the one overseeing these operations. A masked Sith who fought with an uncanny style. The name left Obi-Wan speechless. He had never heard it before, but it conjured images of a towering, menacing figure. A few of the other freed prisoners spoke of this Vader as a demon who came and went, leaving death in his wake. Despite the urgency, Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi had to remain on mission. They reached the central computer core, a towering spire of flickering screens and cables that overlooked a raging lava flow. Two Jedi Knights deftly cut through the security droids, and a clone slicer plugged into the system, frantically typing to scramble the facility's network. Alarms blared, and red lights bathed the corridors. Over the comlink, the slicer's voice rang out. "We've got inbound hostiles from multiple directions. They're in formation. This looks like a final stand." Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, his mind already whirling with possible angles. If these clones were beyond reasoning, they might have to fight their way out. The sabotage was nearly complete, and with it, the droid assembly lines would be permanently disabled. Then came a surge in the force, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to spike, even beyond Mustafar's punishing heat. A door at the far side slid open, revealing a tall figure in a black cloak and mask. He ignited a crimson lightsaber, its glow melding eerily with the ambient red alarms. The aura of malevolence was almost overwhelming, an all-too-familiar brand of darkness. This then was Darth Vader. His breath rasped, amplified through the mask, and he pointed his blade at the intruders. The clones behind him parted, as though they feared stepping too close to their dark master. Ki-Adi-Mundi stepped forward, lightsaber raised. "Who are you?" he demanded, though the dread in his voice betrayed that he already sensed some part of the answer. Vader gave no verbal reply but lunged forward, attacking with a form reminiscent of Gemso, the same style Anakin Skywalker had once preferred. Sparks flew, and the grated walkway shook under the impact of their sabers. The infiltration team fanned out, engaging the black-armored clones who advanced with methodical discipline. Obi-Wan joined Ki-Adi-Mundi against Vader, his azure blade weaving a Sarisu guard. With every clash, Obi-Wan's heart pounded in his chest. The way Vader moved, his strength, his timing, it was almost like dueling Anakin. Yet the raw fury behind it was chilling. Vader's strikes hammered down, forcing Obi-Wan to give ground. Ki-Adi-Mundi circled, trying to catch him off guard. But Vader swept his blade in a powerful arc, forcing the Saurian master to leap back. An ominous hiss of hydraulic machinery echoed through the chamber, as if the entire facility bore witness to the clash of light and dark. Rage poured from Vader like a furnace blast, and the two Jedi realized they were fighting not just a skilled opponent but one driven by hatred so potent it seemed to burn the air around him. Remnants of the man once known as Anakin Skywalker lay buried under layers of betrayal and suffering, stoking the fires of the dark side to unimaginable heights. Yet the infiltration team's mission was nearly complete. With the mainframe sabotaged, the droid assembly lines began to shut down, conveyor belts grinding to a halt. This shift in momentum forced the black-armored clones to fight on the defensive, their advantage of endless droid reinforcements slipping away. Over the comlink, the clone slicer shouted, "We have to exfiltrate now. The meltdown sequence is triggered." Red hazard lights switched to an urgent strobe, and the entire facility trembled as the sabotage threatened to ignite major plasma conduits. In mere minutes, the base could be consumed by an unstoppable chain reaction. Ki-Adi-Mundi locked sabers with Vader, the intersection of green and red energies spitting sparks. "We have to go," the Saurian master shouted to Obi-Wan. But Vader used a surge of telekinesis to fling Ki-Adi-Mundi back against a console. Obi-Wan dashed to his colleague's side, parrying strikes aimed at his midsection. The heat intensified as molten rock spattered up from below. One chunk struck Obi-Wan's shoulder, burning through his tunic before he pushed it away. The infiltration team was already retreating, having secured the freed prisoners. If they delayed any longer, they would all be doomed. Sensing he could not defeat Vader in these conditions, Obi-Wan redoubled his Sorisu defense, creating a barrier that allowed Ki-Adi-Mundi to regain his footing. Together, they pushed forward just enough to break Vader's onslaught, forcing him to dodge near the edge of the catwalk. With a final wave of telekinesis, Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi sent a collapsing pipe tumbling in Vader's path, buying precious seconds. They raced after their companions, the facility shaking violently around them. As they fled, Darth Vader did not pursue. For a fleeting instant, Obi-Wan dared to glance back, seeing the lone figure in black amid the swirling embers and smoke, a red blade humming in the gloom. The sense of heartbreak was overwhelming. Whether it was truly Anakin or some twisted simulacrum, the tragedy was profound. The man who might have ended this war and restored balance was now fueling its endless flames. Pulling Ki-Adi-Mundi along, Obi-Wan sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors, the meltdown klaxon screaming. Behind them, fires erupted from broken gas lines, and support beams toppled. The infiltration team barely reached their craft, which lifted off moments before the facility belched a massive column of flame into the Mustafar sky. Back on Coruscant, Yoda felt the reverberation in the Force as the Mustafar stronghold was destroyed. He also sensed the clash with Darth Vader, though that name was still unknown to him. Mace Windu, standing beside him in the Jedi Temple Security Center, asked what had transpired. Yoda merely shook his head, the sorrow evident in his drooping ears. "A darkness deeper than we feared," he said. "Escalate, this war will, unless confronted it is." When Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi returned, battered but alive, they reported their encounter to the Council. Horror and confusion rippled among the remaining masters. Mace Windu clenched his fists at the mention of a masked Sith leading clone forces. "We must be prepared," he said, voice grim. "Sidious is contained, but the dark side has found another champion. The civil war will only intensify if we cannot unmask this Darth Vader." Obi-Wan, silent, could only brood over the ominous memory of that presence. Time wore on, and the galaxy continued to fracture. Even with Mustafar's droid production halted, other warlords and remnants of the Separatist Alliance rose to fill the void. The Jedi Order, now forced to become de facto leaders of a provisional government, struggled to maintain any semblance of peace. Some star systems recognized Jedi authority as legitimate, while others condemned it. Through all of this, Palpatine remained in his cell, smiling darkly whenever news of Vader's exploits reached him. With practiced cunning, the former Chancellor sowed seeds of discord, telling whichever Jedi guarded him that Vader is fulfilling the destiny that was meant for another, or that the Force requires balance through conflict, or that the Jedi cannot fight a perpetual war without losing themselves. These words dug deep into the minds of even the strongest masters, for they carried a kernel of truth amidst the lies. As supply lines faltered, famine and disease spread on some outer worlds, fueling new resentments. The Jedi's humanitarian efforts saved countless lives, but also drew them further into the quagmire of administration and logistics. Tensions within the Order mounted, with younger Jedi questioning whether they should remain guardians or become rulers. Mace Windu, widely respected, urged discipline and principle. Yoda, burdened by centuries of perspective, reminded them that the Force transcends any single government's crisis. Yet the Force had never been so clouded, twisted by the ongoing war and the intensifying presence of the dark side. All the while, battles between factions of clones flared up across the galaxy. Some fought under the banner of an emergent group calling itself the New Empire, apparently guided by Vader's strategists, though the masked figure himself only appeared at critical junctures. Others pledged loyalty to the Jedi or the True Republic. The labyrinth of alliances grew more convoluted with each passing day. In countless skirmishes, knights and masters found themselves squaring off against wave after wave of well-trained soldiers who once called them general. The heartbreak was constant, especially as many clones still retained an unexplainable bond with the Jedi, even when forced to fight them. No single victory was ever complete, no defeat entirely final. More than once, a battered company of clones would switch sides upon learning the truth of Palpatine's betrayal, only to be gunned down by extremist forces. Eventually, an emergency council session was convened in the temple's highest tower, the same room the Jedi Council used to hold its most sacred dialogues. Nearly all surviving council members attended, either in person or via holocommunicators. The temple's battered corridors told the tale of recent raids, but the tower remained as serene as possible, a reminder of their ancient heritage. Mace Windu stood at the center of the circle, while Yoda hovered nearby on his small chair. Cadi Mundi, battered from the Mustafar mission, leaned slightly on his staff. Obi-Wan joined them, lines of worry etched into his face. Other masters such as Shaak Ti, Plo Koon, those who had lived through the chaos, were present as spectral images on the projector, unable to leave their systems due to ongoing conflicts. Mace Windu began, "Brothers and sisters in the Force, we stand at a crossroads. The arrest of Palpatine did not prevent war from swallowing the galaxy. It merely shifted its shape. We face an open-ended conflict, fueled by fear, misinformation, and the dark side itself. We have a responsibility to restore justice, yet the means of doing so risk dragging us deeper into the realm of tyranny." His voice resonated with tension, the weight of leadership heavy upon him. Yoda spoke next, his tone soft but resolute. "A pivot we must find. End this war we must, or destroy us it will. A path to unify the clones, to bring clarity to the Senate. Somehow we must create. But certain it is that Sidious cannot remain untried. Nor can Vader remain free." Several masters murmured in agreement. Yet there was also conflict in their eyes. One question loomed. Should they attempt to forcibly unify the galaxy under the Jedi's leadership? Or should they dissolve their own authority in hopes of fostering genuine democracy? Both paths held danger. Both played into Palpatine's final taunt, that the Jedi would become the very tyrants they strove to defeat. At length, Obi-Wan cleared his throat. "We must find Darth Vader. If we can confirm who he is, we might reach him. Or, if that fails, prevent him from fueling further divisions. The illusions that feed this war will only fade if we lay the truth bare, however terrible that truth might be." His gaze flickered around the room, lingering on Yoda, who nodded solemnly. Everyone knew what he implied. If Darth Vader was indeed Anakin Skywalker, then the fate of the Chosen One was entwined with the galaxies. And if redemption was impossible, a final confrontation would be necessary. Thus was set the course for a series of missions that would define the next chapter of this endless civil war. Word quietly spread among the Jedi that the Council had authorized Project Reconciliation, a covert operation dedicated to uncovering Vader's identity, infiltration of his networks, and, if possible, luring him away from the dark side. Parallel to this, the Council also demanded a legitimate legal process for Palpatine's crimes, though the complexities of a galaxy at war made this nearly impossible. Even so, they prepared evidence, testimonies, and data logs for a future day when a trial might be convened. In the meantime, the Civil War ground on, a harsh reality that tested every principle the Jedi had ever held dear. Scattered battles flared from the core worlds to the outer rim. Freed clones joined forces with roving Jedi strike teams, sometimes forging alliances with local defense fleets. Pro-Palpatine factions, aided covertly by wealthy conspirators, staged terrorist attacks on supply convoys, all the while insisting they were defending the legitimate Chancellor. The mysterious new empire under Darth Vader's shadow expanded incrementally, capturing entire sectors that recognized strength over the messy idealism of an incomplete republic. And in hidden corners of the galaxy, old separatist pockets found new life, forging improbable deals with pirate lords or unscrupulous politicians to carve out their own miniature dominions. Through it all, the Jedi Temple remained a beacon, however dimmed by the surrounding darkness. Yoda kept vigil over Sidious's cell, feeling the slow, constant push of the dark side. Mace Windu traveled tirelessly between star systems, forging alliances and commanding defensive operations. Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi led infiltration teams to gather intel on Vader, drawing ever closer to uncovering the final puzzle of his identity. Each step forward, however, came at a cost. Jedi Knights perished, civilians were displaced, entire planets burned. The war's toll weighed on the hearts of all. And each night, as the city lights of Coruscant shimmered beneath a sky darkened by star destroyers and half-ruined skyscrapers, the question persisted. Could this civil war ever end? Now, it seemed the galaxy stood on a knife's edge. With the Sith Lord captured but not defeated, with a new darkness rising, and with no single banner under which to unite the countless worlds, the future was more uncertain than ever. Yet, in that uncertainty lay possibility. The Jedi Order, forced to adapt, might discover deeper truths about the Force, about compassion, about the resilience of hope. Even in the ashes of broken illusions, new growth could appear. Thus they pressed on, day by day, crisis by crisis, in the face of a civil war without end. No matter how fierce the darkness, they would not abandon their calling as guardians of life. And so the story continued, each chapter an unfolding testament to the galaxy's fragile but unbreakable will to survive, searching for a dawn beyond the endless night. A brittle hush settled over the Jedi Temple in the wake of the emergency council session, as if the ancient structure itself sensed the peril stretching across the galaxy. Gone were the days when the temple's corridors bustled with hopeful Padawans, diligent knights, and calm, guiding masters. Instead, the marble floors bore scorch marks from recent attacks, and the once pristine statues lining the halls were chipped or cracked. Despite all this, the temple persisted, its foundations still anchored in the Force, its battered spires silhouetted against the glaring skyline of Coruscant. It was a wounded sanctuary, a place fighting for its soul even as the larger conflict raged beyond. Outside, in the streets that wound around the temple complex, the tumult of battle had given way to a tense standstill. Some blocks lay in ruins, patrolled by clones loyal to the Jedi or by local security forces that recognized the provisional authority Mace Windu and Bail Organa were trying to establish. Elsewhere, extremist cells maintained safe houses, stockpiling weapons for sudden raids. Smoke often clouded the midday sun, and at night, sporadic blaster fire and the roar of patrol speeders punctuated what should have been peaceful hours. Civilians, too frightened to walk openly, survived by clinging to cramped shelters or by fleeing deeper into the underlevels of Coruscant, where no single faction could claim firm control. Within the temple's highest tower, the council reconvened the following dawn to formalize the next steps of Project Reconciliation. Mace Windu stood at the center, dark circles under his eyes betraying many sleepless nights. Yoda perched on his small hover chair, silent but watchful, while Ki-Adi-Mundi and Obi-Wan Kenobi waited in measured composure. Holographic presences dotted the perimeter, each master connected from a remote war zone or a star system under threat. The partial flicker of these transmissions only underscored the disjointed nature of the galaxy's communications. "Time is short, my friends," Mace Windu began. "Reports of Darth Vader's conquests have grown more dire. He is no mere figurehead. He commands a formidable array of ex-Imperial loyalists, those who refuse to acknowledge Palpatine's capture, and he's organized them into an offensive that's cutting swaths through several outer rim sectors. With each victory, he gains new resources and new alliances." Ki-Adi-Mundi inclined his elongated head. "It appears many warlords or crime syndicates are prepared to bow to whomever offers them the best terms. Credits, trade routes, protection. In these desperate times, Vader positions himself as an enforcer. They see him as unstoppable. Fear becomes his currency." Obi-Wan, his face etched with quiet tension, added, "We must confront him, but not merely on a battlefield. A purely martial victory might be impossible against someone with his power and cunning. We should remember that Palpatine manipulated the galaxy by fostering illusions of security, illusions of betrayal. Vader has inherited that playbook. If he truly is, Obi-Wan paused, wrestling momentarily with the name he had come to dread. If he truly is Anakin Skywalker, then perhaps there is still a fragment of the man we knew. We must test that possibility. If we fail, at least we'll know where we stand. From his hover chair, Yoda exhaled a thoughtful sigh. Stopped Sidious may be for now, but ended his influence is not. Dark side energies swirl around his cell, beckon to those who listen. A trial for him nearly impossible to convene. Yet hold him without trial an act of tyranny that would be dangerous, the path is. Mace Windu nodded, eyes scanning the circle. We walk a razor's edge. We want to honor the principles of the Republic, but we lack the means to rebuild it overnight. The galaxy is in flames with no single authority recognized by all. That's why Bail Organa and Mon Mothma are pushing for a provisional charter. But the more we try to enforce it, the louder the accusations become that the Jedi want to seize total control. A murmur of agreement rippled among the holographic images of distant masters. Shak Ti's voice, crackling through the interference, added, "On Kamino, the tension is at a breaking point. The cloners no longer want to produce more troopers, not with everything so uncertain. They've threatened to shut down their facilities unless they receive official protection. And, ironically, some of those facilities are guarded by clones loyal to Sidious's original directive. I can't overstate how volatile the situation is." Obi-Wan weighed in again. This only emphasizes how crucial it is to disrupt Vader's aura of invincibility. We need a demonstration, not necessarily a direct military triumph, but proof that his influence can be challenged. If we can liberate a key sector he's seized, or if we can peel away an important ally of his, it might crack the mythos he's building around himself. That would buy us time to strengthen alliances and maybe organize a formal hearing for Palpatine. Yoda's ears drooped slightly. A daunting task it is, yet undertake it we must. Send infiltration teams, we will. Identify vulnerabilities, test them. Mace Windu slowly exhaled, then turned to Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi. Then so be it. You two already have experience dealing with him, though that encounter on Mustafar was brief. Master Kenobi, Master Mundi, you'll head up a covert operation to locate Vader's strongholds in the Outer Rim. It's possible he's operating from more than one base. Gather intelligence. If you see an opening to strike or to reason with him, do so. But be cautious. We can't afford to lose either of you. A solemn understanding passed among them. The meeting adjourned with no sense of triumph, only the sober acknowledgement of another mission that might determine the galaxy's fate. As the holograms faded, each master returned to their respective duties. Yoda hovered away to resume his vigil near Sidious's cell, while Mace Windu left to organize reinforcements for the systems currently under siege. Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi exchanged a quiet nod. They would depart that very evening, once they had prepared. In the hours before leaving, Obi-Wan took a moment to check on the temple's damaged archives. Although much of the data remained intact, the facility had suffered from sabotage attempts. The archives once glowed with knowledge of Jedi lore, the wisdom of centuries carefully curated. Now, some sections flickered with broken holocrons, and the ambient lighting revealed walls still blackened by blaster charge Jocasta knew was gone. She had perished in the earliest chaos of the partial betrayal. A handful of archivists now kept watch, cataloging lost or corrupted data. The archives felt haunted. Walking past a row of shattered data shelves, Obi-Wan found one of the archivists, a young knight named Darvik Hell, hunched over a console. Darvik looked up with relief when he recognized the older master. "Master Kenobi, I've been reconstructing the transmissions from Mustafar. I heard you're heading out again. I wanted to show you something." He keyed a sequence, and a holographic projection shimmered into the air. At first, Obi-Wan saw only fuzzy static, but gradually it cleared into fleeting images of the black armored clones assembling lines of captured droids, a figure in a cloak moving among them. Then the figure removed the cloak's hood, revealing the distinctive black mask of Vader. The clip continued. A moment of Vader igniting a crimson saber, cutting down a droid that failed to respond quickly enough. Finally, there was a faint audio snippet. "Lord Vader," a clone commander said, voice garbled. "Should we implement the next phase on Belsavis?" Vader's reply, modulated by the mask, sent a chill down Obi-Wan's spine. "Only when I give the signal. The Senate pretenders must see how powerless they are. The galaxy cries out for order, and order it shall have, under the new empire." The hologram froze and Darvik powered down the console. "This came through the day after you destroyed that facility," the archivist explained. "It looks like a partial upload that bounced through multiple relays before it reached us. We have no idea who leaked it, but it suggests Vader has more than just Mustafar under his control." Obi-Wan studied the console, frowning. Belsavis is an ice planet, a prison world known for ancient vaults. If Vader is referencing some next phase, then perhaps he intends to break out certain criminals or forcibly recruit them. It's consistent with the rumors that he's forging alliances with warlords and mercenaries. This might be a pivotal lead. He laid a gentle hand on Darvik's shoulder. "Thank you. You may have just helped us narrow our search." Not long after, Obi-Wan rendezvoused with Ki-Adi-Mundi in the temple hangar. Their small infiltration vessel was a sleek, unmarked corvette designed for stealth rather than heavy combat, painted in gray tones that vanished easily against the starry void. A handful of clone pilots, those who had been freed from their chips or who had them removed, waited to greet the two masters. Though they wore no official markings, they carried themselves with quiet professionalism, ready to assist on what they knew could be a one-way mission. As the ramp sealed behind them, Obi-Wan felt a faint sense of déjà vu. The hum of engines, the hush before departure, the swirl of tension in the Force. Since the Clone Wars began, he had launched on countless missions from Coruscant. Now, despite everything that had changed, Sidious in custody, the Jedi Council battered but surviving, the clones divided. Some patterns remained the same. War was still war. Their ship lifted off, skirting the battered spires of the temple, and merged into the congested sky lanes. Coruscant's cityscape glowed a subdued red and gold, flickering where fires raged or where overhead troopers patrolled. A few civilian transports scurried by, carrying refugees out of the city or perhaps from one devastated sector to another. Ki-Adi-Mundi stood behind the pilot, gazing out the viewport. "Let us hope this infiltration yields more answers than the last," he said softly. Obi-Wan offered a faint nod. "We'll find them one way or another. Whether those answers help us is another question." With that, the ship broke free of traffic and angled upward, escaping Coruscant's gravity well. Moments later, the starry expanse embraced them, and they made the jump to hyperspace. During the journey, they pored over intelligence gleaned from the archives and from friendly informants. Belsavis, an old Republic prison world, was rumored to house not just modern criminals, but ancient horrors locked away in stasis fields. Over centuries, different administrations had used or neglected it. In the chaos of the new Civil War, it was plausible that Vader saw an opportunity there, perhaps a place to recruit dangerous inmates or uncover lost weapons. The infiltration team meticulously planned potential insertion points, coded signals, and fallback routes. Given the planet's extreme climates, sweltering volcanic tunnels beneath glacial expanses, deploying would be no small task. Meanwhile, deeper in the temple's subterranean vault, Yoda continued his nearly ceaseless vigil. Seated on a cushion with his legs crossed, the Grand Master kept his gnarled cane by his side, as though even in meditation he remained ready for sudden violence. Beyond a thick durasteel door lay Sidious's holding cell, an energy field enhanced by ancient Jedi wards. A pair of loyal clones stood guard in the corridor, shifting their weight uneasily whenever they felt the chill of the dark side emanating from the prisoner. Inside that cell, Sidious's physical form appeared weakened, pale, sunken-eyed, but his aura in the Force was as potent as ever. Occasionally, Yoda would slip into a light trance to monitor the swirling energies. He perceived how Sidious's influence spiraled outward, searching for minds to exploit. The wards contained much of it, but some malignant whisper always found the hairline cracks in any fortress. Yoda was certain that Sidious telepathically communicated with those still loyal to him, encouraging sabotage, fueling the pro-imperial factions, sowing discontent among the uncertain. It was a constant battle, and the toll weighed on the ancient master. Yet he persisted, driven by the conviction that this act, keeping the Sith Lord confined, preventing him from further poisoning the galaxy, was as vital as any offensive in the field. One evening, or what passed for evening in those windowless depths, Mace Windu relieved Yoda from the vigil. Stepping forward, he bowed slightly. "Master Yoda, you must rest. Let me stand guard for a time." Yoda opened his eyes, lines of exhaustion etched into his green, wrinkled face. He rose slowly with a tired nod. "Thank you, Master Windu. Weary, I am, but still strong in the Force, I must remain." With a last glance at the closed cell door, he shuffled away, cane tapping gently on the floor. Left alone, Mace Windu leaned against the corridor wall, arms folded, gaze locked on the heavy door. Within, Sidious was silent. Yet the Force sang with tension, like a high note straining to break. Mace recalled the moment he had nearly ended Sidious's life with his blade. How, in that pivotal instant, he had chosen to arrest rather than execute, fearing the line between justice and vengeance. In the aftermath, some part of him regretted not striking that final blow, for the galaxy might have been spared this endless civil war. But in his heart, he knew that moment had tested his commitment to the Jedi Code. Allowing Sidious a trial someday proved that the Jedi could still hold to their principles, even if that principle felt like a millstone around their necks. He found himself musing quietly, "We should be no different from the Sith if we summarily kill our captives. And yet, how many more die each day while he still lives?" The question echoed in the empty corridor, with only the distant hum of energy fields to answer. With a final steadying breath, Mace drew upon the Force to quell his turmoil, then began a slow patrol, glancing occasionally at the clone guards to ensure their resolve was intact. Meanwhile, aboard the Infiltration corvette, hyperspace lines streaked across the canopy, painting the cockpit in shifting shades of blue. The pilot kept silent, focused on their route, while Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi refined their plan. Belsavi's was no stranger to them in terms of lore. Old Republic records described labyrinthine tunnels carved by geothermal vents, with entire prison wings built into the subterranean network. Large swathes of the planet's surface were covered in thick ice, ideal for stasis vaults that required constant cold. If Vader planned to break out any inmates, the infiltration team hoped to sabotage that effort before it began. After hours of tense anticipation, the ship emerged from hyperspace near the Belsavi system. The star glowed a pale yellow, and the planet itself hung like a mottled white and gray orb. Hasty scans revealed only a handful of active satellites in orbit, likely relics of the old prison administration, plus some scattered Imperial beacons that blinked uncertainly. The Infiltration corvette kept its distance, lurking behind a small moon to avoid detection. Ki-Adi-Mundi analyzed the sensor data on a glowing console. Minimal traffic. We have faint readings of a few ships on the surface, possibly docked near some prison complexes. Nothing that screams a large occupation force. Obi-Wan nodded thoughtfully. Vader might be working clandestinely, not with an entire fleet. One or two well-equipped ships could be enough if his goal is infiltration. He wouldn't want to broadcast his presence until he was ready to strike. The pilot chimed in. "Masters, shall I plot a low-orbit insertion? We could mask our approach against the planet's magnetosphere. Those old satellites might not be actively scanning, but we don't want to chance it." "Do so," Obi-Wan replied, placing a hand on the pilot's chair. "We'll cloak as much as we can." Minutes later, the Infiltration corvette glided in on minimal power, hiding against cosmic noise. The planet's curvature rose to fill the viewport, vast ice fields punctuated by mountainous ridges, swirling storms moving across the horizon. Night blanketed half the globe, and that was the region they aimed for, shadow in more ways than one. Once in the upper atmosphere, the pilot deftly guided the craft toward a desolate sector rumored to hold a long-abandoned prison wing. Icy wind hammered the hull, and the sensors occasionally crackled with static from electric storms overhead. They found a rocky plateau partially free of ice, ringed by jagged cliffs that jutted from a frozen sea. The pilot set them down behind a natural outcropping of stone, where their ship could remain hidden from overhead scans. When the ramp lowered, a gust of frigid air rushed in, and the infiltration team readied themselves. Ki-Adi-Mundi secured his heavy cloak, while Obi-Wan pulled up his hood. 2 clone commandos followed, each wearing thermal gear over simplified armor plates, blasters in hand. The icy ground crunched underfoot, and the wind's roar drowned out most conversation. Obi-Wan peered through macro binoculars at what lay beyond the cliff's edge. In the distance, a faint glimmer of industrial lighting suggested the entrance to an underground facility. Plumes of steam rose from vent shafts, evidence of geothermal activity beneath the crust. "That must be the old prison complex," Obi-Wan said, squinting into the swirl of snow. "There's still power there. We'll have to be cautious." Ki-Adi-Mundi nodded, checking the readouts on a handheld scanner. "Yes, a residual energy signature. Likely some prison cells are still online, or perhaps repurposed. Let's move." They trudged across the frozen expanse, using the natural contours of the land to remain hidden. The cold was brutal. Any exposed metal or flesh risked instant frostbite. Yet the Jedi used the Force to regulate their body temperatures, staying nimble. The clone commandos relied on their gear, faceplates sealed against the slicing wind. Step by step, they neared the perimeter, where a chain-link barrier half-buried in snow testified to the old prison's boundaries. Beyond lay a yawning cavern mouth framed by durasteel reinforcements. Slipping inside, they found an abandoned security checkpoint. The lights flickered overhead, revealing spiderweb cracks in the walls. Ancient crates and broken droids littered the floor, as if at some point the staff had evacuated in a hurry. A single control panel near a sealed blast door still emitted a faint glow, likely powered by a backup generator. The team spread out, covering corners and checking for traps. One of the clone commandos knelt by the door's control panel, hooking up a data spike. The other commando scouted the side corridors, blaster at the ready. Then came a strange hiss from deeper within. Obi-Wan froze, motioning for the others to stay quiet. Ki-Adi-Mundi's hand tightened around his lightsaber. In the gloom ahead, a door slid open with a rusty screech. 2 black-armored troopers emerged, faces hidden behind opaque helmets reminiscent of the clones, but sporting no recognizable Legion markings. Each carried a rifle with glowing diodes along the barrel. Their posture was alert, as though they were on a routine patrol. For a heartbeat, neither side moved, lost in the mutual shock of unexpected contact. Then the troopers snapped their weapons up, and the corridor erupted in blaster fire. Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi ignited their sabers in unison, the blue and green blades casting dancing reflections on the icy walls. With practiced precision, they deflected the volley of red bolts, sending sparks skittering. The clone commandos ducked behind crates, returning disciplined fire. In a few swift strides, Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi closed the distance, slashing the troopers' rifles in half. Disarmed but still defiant, the troopers lunged with vibroblades hidden in their gauntlets. A brief exchange of parries and counters followed before the Jedi disarmed them fully. One trooper died from a glancing blow across the chest plate that shorted out life support systems. The other slumped against the wall, still conscious but wounded. Ki-Adi-Mundi crouched beside him, lightsaber humming at the trooper's throat. "Who do you serve?" the master demanded. Through the trooper's helmet, a garbled voice insisted, "We serve the rightful emperor, Lord Vader." Then he spat blood inside the visor. "He will free our master. He will tear the Jedi down for the traitors they are." Before Ki-Adi-Mundi could press for more, the trooper convulsed. A high-pitched tone whined from his helmet, and then he went limp. A suicide failsafe, possibly. The black visor stared blankly, lifeless. Ki-Adi-Mundi exhaled sharply. Obi-Wan, standing over the fallen trooper, muttered, "They're well-trained and clearly fanatical. We should proceed carefully." The door control beeped, and the surviving clone commando managed to force it open. Inside lay a corridor lined with sealed cells, each with a reinforced front of thick transparasteel. Overhead lights flickered ominously, revealing that many cells were empty or in disrepair. The place felt abandoned, but a few cells still flickered with occupant life signs. As the team ventured deeper, they glimpsed humanoid shapes stirring behind the gloom of the transparisteel. One occupant, a pale, gaunt alien with milky eyes, pressed his face to the barrier and rasped through the speaker grill, "Please, let me out. I've been left here to die." The infiltration team hesitated. They couldn't risk unleashing dangerous criminals. Obi-Wan tried scanning the cell's readout, but found only corrupted files. "We should focus on Vader's operations first," he whispered, stepping away. "If we can confirm he's actually here, or if he's setting up something for a future breakout, that's our mission." Carefully, they advanced down multiple corridors. Rime and frost coated much of the ceiling, and steam hissed from pipes along the floor. The combined effect was both claustrophobic and hostile, as if the prison itself was alive, groaning and sighing in the planet's geothermic grip. Occasionally, the infiltration team found small squads of black armored troopers, each skirmish brief but intense. By using stealth and the advantage of Jedi reflexes, they avoided raising a general alarm, at least for a time. Yet the deeper they went, the more they sensed a strange concentration of dark side energy. It was not as overwhelming as when they had faced Vader on Mustafar, but it definitely indicated something unnatural at work. Obi-Wan had the unsettling feeling that these corridors had once served not just as prisons, but as tombs. Ancient carvings in certain sealed sections suggested Old Republic or even older civilizations. The Force felt thick here, as though saturated with the memories of past atrocities. At last, they reached a large chamber lined with archaic stasis pods, tall cylinders filled with a viscous, bluish fluid. Many stood empty, glass shattered. Others contained shadowy forms suspended in fluid, forms that looked vaguely humanoid but warped by implants or genetic experimentations. The overhead lighting was more stable here, illuminating catwalks that crisscrossed the chamber at multiple levels. Machinery hummed, indicating that someone had reactivated these pods recently. A wide metal platform at the center hosted an array of computer terminals, each with streams of data scrolling in unfamiliar codes. Obi-Wan exchanged a glance with Ki-Adi-Mundi. This was no ordinary prison wing. It looked like an experimental facility, perhaps used in the past for unorthodox or forbidden research. If Vader intended to release or weaponize whatever was locked away here, the consequences could be catastrophic. The infiltration team fanned out, scanning for traps. One clone commando found evidence of fresh footprints in a corner thick with frost, suggesting traffic to a deeper sublevel. And then, faintly, a voice echoed through the corridors, cold, mechanical, and all too recognizable. "You do not belong here. Surrender, and your deaths will be swift." Obi-Wan froze. It was Darth Vader's voice, transmitted through a loudspeaker or perhaps projected telepathically. The infiltration team tensed, scanning the catwalks overhead. Nothing moved, only the flickering shadows cast by the overhead lights. Ki-Adi-Mundi called out, "Vader, show yourself. We have no desire for needless bloodshed." A snarl reverberated in the chamber. "Bloodshed is the price of your betrayal, Jedi. You cannot hide behind illusions forever." A hiss of machinery signaled the opening of a hatch high on the chamber's wall. Dim red light poured through, and into view stepped Darth Vader himself, clad in the dark armor they had witnessed on Mustafar. His cloak billowed in the rising steam from the machinery below. He stood on an upper catwalk, arms folded, the hilt of his saber hanging at his belt like a silent threat. Obi-Wan's breath caught in his throat. Even at this distance, that presence pressed against his senses like a wave of scorching heat. The Force swirled around Vader with a relentless fury. He had not grown weaker since Mustafar. If anything, he seemed more sure of himself, more steeped in darkness. Yet Obi-Wan could not help but search for any glimmer of the man he had once mentored. Cautiously, Obi-Wan stepped forward on the central platform. "Vader," he said, voice echoing. "This war does not have to continue. Whatever Palpatine told you, he is captured. The galaxy knows the truth of his deceit. Abandon this path before it consumes you." Vader's helmet tilted, regarding Obi-Wan with a silent contempt. Then his modulated voice replied, "You understand nothing. Sidious's capture was a temporary setback. His grand design for a united empire transcends his own imprisonment. I serve order. You and your crumbling Jedi cling to outdated ideals, letting the galaxy burn in your attempts to preserve a phantom republic." He reached for his lightsaber hilt. "I have no intention of bowing to you." Ki-Adi-Mundi ignited his saber first, bright green casting shifting shadows. "We don't ask for submission, Vader. We ask for reason." Vader ignited his crimson blade in response, the hum filling the chamber. "Reason has no place here, only power and the will to use it." With that, he leaped from the catwalk, diving toward the platform in a swirl of cape and plasma. Obi-Wan raised his lightsaber in a Sorisu guard just in time to meet Vader's overhead slash. Sparks flew, and the impact forced Obi-Wan back a step. Ki-Adi-Mundi lunged from the side, aiming to flank Vader, but the Sith Lord pivoted smoothly, parrying both sabers with raw, explosive strength. Across the chamber, black armored troopers emerged from side passages, engaging the clone commandos in fierce firefights. Blaster bolts ricocheted off metal walls, occasionally striking stasis pods, which erupted in showers of fluid. From some broken pods, half-formed creatures flopped out, groaning in unnatural pain, only to be cut down by stray fire. The infiltration quickly devolved into chaos. Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi did their best to coordinate, weaving their saber forms to create openings. They had trained together for years, though never specifically to fight a single foe as powerful as this. Vader moved with an eerie grace, a lethal blend of aggression and precision. His blows hammered against the Jedi's defenses, forcing them to shift or break formation. One particularly fierce slash battered Ki-Adi-Mundi's saber arm, numbing it momentarily. The Syrian master retreated, shaking out the pain, while Obi-Wan took up the defense to draw Vader's attention. "Anakin," Obi-Wan tried one last time, voice cracking with the weight of memory. "If there's anything left of you, please stop." But Vader's only response was a thrust that nearly grazed Obi-Wan's ribcage. The Jedi Master spun away, chest heaving. Clearly, reason would not reach him tonight, perhaps ever. With the battle intensifying, Ki-Adi-Mundi signaled the clone commandos via comlink, instructing them to set charges on the facility's main power conduits. If they couldn't claim this place, they would destroy it. Whatever vile experiments lurked here would be sealed beneath the ice. In the middle of a vicious exchange, Vader suddenly unleashed a wave of force energy that threw Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi off the central platform. They landed hard on the cold floor below, rolling to minimize injury. Vader advanced with his blade held high, about to deliver a finishing strike. Sensing the oncoming blow, Obi-Wan hurled a loose chunk of metal with the Force, striking Vader's shoulder plate. It bought a half-second. Ki-Adi-Mundi regained his footing and launched a series of rapid thrusts to drive Vader back, though it was like pushing against a durasteel wall. For a moment, the green blade locked with the crimson, sizzling in the tense standoff of energy.